So today we're going to spend some time with Colin Cantwell, who has an amazing career in art sciences, going back quite some time. He's worked on a number of films people will be very familiar with, and also has had a lot of experience just sort of being a pioneer in technology and art. So I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
My pleasure.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about growing up, how you got involved in, what sparked your interest in science and art and, you know, all these
Okay.
great things.
Okay. Uh, I was very interested in all the subject areas in the library
Yeah.
and had stack access to two libraries and was working my way through Dewey Decimal System and picking out different categories and treating them as if they were windows into the world,
Uh-huh.
and that the different views were specialties, very highly concentrated specialties, but also I had, as I learned more, the feeling that it was another way was they were all looking into different aspects like they were different windows into the same world,
Mm-hmm.
even though they were using different languages and different ways to express it, that there might have been a great deal of crossover between what each of these could show me and what I could gradually get to where I could learn to experience it some rather than
Mm-hmm.
studying it. I was born in San Francisco, and in grade school, I got into school and they discovered that I was very nearsighted. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. How old were you at that point?
6.
6. Okay.
And uh, that was going to be quite a changing experience. I didn't know that there were bricks in building, and recognizing people before they were up close
Oh, yeah.
wasn't part of my world.
Oh, wow.
So uh, I had learned to read a good deal before getting into grade school. And I found that first days that the books were, I had read them all before when I was just learning.
Right.
So I made a deal with the teacher that if I had read all of the textbooks, could I go next door to the second grade and read what they had? And she said, yeah, that's okay. And I said, and so forth. And she gave me this funny look and really smiled and said, okay. So I read my way through all of the books of the first 5 grades before I got to the end of the first semester. And from there on, I was off and running on being able to joyously read in a whole section and find who was the new information
Mm-hmm.
about something, and gradually get a picture of what a whole section was about and distinguish which parts were just slight add-ons or which were the primal things
Right.
that were the fountain source that specialization was doing, and then how all of those seem to be coming together in a way, but we're treating them as specialties so we can concentrate.
Mm-hmm.
But then seeing through that, particularly back to the authors and those minds that had been creating, swimming back upstream to that source,
Mm-hmm.
was just a real passion and very enriching to me, even at that age. That continued up until age 11. And at age 11, I just got into junior high. And then I had a surprise. The doctor found that I had TB. My grandfather had died of TB. My father got TB.
Oh, wow.
And did survive and recovered. And in my case, they didn't have any drugs, so you had to bed rest. And in my case, I had to bed rest all the time, and with for 2 hours every afternoon, with a 2-pound shot bag on my chest to keep from breathing too deeply.
Wow.
And then the other news the same week was that my retina were going to detach because I was so nearsighted.
Wow.
And my Coke bottle glasses weren't going to do it anymore. And I had to give my eyes time to recover. So I was in a semi-darkened room, and it was going to be for a few years.
Wow.
While my body had to get ahead on this. And that was, quite an advance. They had gotten it early enough. So
that started when you were 11?
Yeah. So a new part of my education was based on weaving together whatever I had read and incorporated, and then trying to weave on from there.
Mm-hmm.
And cross-weave from the different parts of the Dewey Decimal System as well. And the first immediate crisis was finding that, above all, I had to learn how to extrapolate from an idea and then come to what was a wrong thing, a total invalidation of where I'd come from, whatever the previous understanding had been.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant I had to learn to flow backwards from these things without losing them, but without calling them correct, and see when was the last place that looked like it was valid, at least at the moment, for going more forward, and what was my new answer then for not ending up with the same mistake I had previously made. So it was a different kind of education, and my mind was very visual all the way along, and I was doing drawing and so forth before I ever got in school, and that was very natural to me. So visualization got eventually quite a bit freer, and the very dimensions of it were my own synthesis and extrapolation, and it beat not thinking, not doing anything new, and even visualizing what it's like. I think the first flying was imagining I was on a bicycle going down our downhill street. And then there was a cross street at the end and houses. And I got to maybe I could concentrate and fly over the houses at the end. And that kind of thing gradually continued.
Yeah, you had an imagination.
And it was kind of rich and rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
It was fueled by a lot of stuff from a lot of different sources, which was a huge help.
Yeah. So you had mentioned to me earlier that you went to UCLA.
Yes, I did. When I recovered, I got back into the world. And a scary place.
Yeah, always.
Lots of overload. And at UCLA, I started with the year of art, and the art class wasn't very good. I was looking for something more, so I switched over to engineering and took the first 2 years of engineering. And that hooked into the other sides that I'd experienced. And then from that, I took an elective from an animation teacher from Disney who had 2 classes on animation. And I found that very intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
So I proposed, while being dissatisfied with where the engineering was going, not creative enough, and I started talking with the administration about, how about animation? How about animation as a major, with me as a trial subject? I outlined the curriculum, and I took all of the hardest classes from the technological end and all of the hardest classes from the art end, and suggested that they use that as a curriculum and me as a trial subject, and could we do it, please?
So,
they did.
Yeah, I mean, with what I know about you, it seems like you've been about sort of the marriage between art and science, and I mean, I guess it goes all the way back to college then.
Yes, and the personal philosophies from different fields and from different cultures also, and back in time, how we got our technologies and what was the origin behind that was all part of the picture that was interesting to me and that I then pursued. And experimenting or trying something to see if it could go better was a big passion. So I did graduate, and then as a summer job, I had gotten an animation camera job at Charles Eames' studio, the guy who did furniture and modern design.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a big workshop, and architects came and saw him and so forth. And I had invented my own, what I called a gravity well. And I decided one weekend to go ahead and build one and take it over to Eames' workshop. And so I made out of a rectangle and then a little octagonal braces, and then little legs. I made a thing that I could stretch plastic from the rim to where it was a flat sheet, all at about a normal table height. And then I cut a hole in the center and emptied a drink can, and then strapped the plastic sheet right around the hole so it was tightly against the rim of the drink can. And then I tied that down to a diagonal X on the floor and tensioned it so that it parabolically stretched the plastic into a gravitational curve that went down into the center. And then not only could you take marbles and run them around and watch them interact with each other, but also you could do the same thing with coins. And a silver dollar or so, as it was going around, it always tracks the zero gravity line as it's going. It's like a motorcycle with nobody on it. And it'll get warped and so forth. They'll interweave, and you can play with it, and it's great, great fun. And it's a great way to visualize how that gravitational influence interacts and what kinds of interactions you can do. So I set that up in the back on the weekend, on the back of Eames' studio. And I knew he was doing something for IBM for a Mathematica exhibit. And I thought this was highly appropriate for an exhibit, and people would love to play with it. But actually, he got instantly, he blew his top. He said, take that thing into the far back of the shop and don't let anybody see it. And you're fired in a week.
Oh, wow.
And apparently my submitting the cost for it for $11 for the lumber and the sheet of plastic was too arrogant for him.
Oh, wow.
The funny thing that happened, though, was the architects that he knew and respected kept discovering it in the back of the shop and playing with it and coming back and complimenting on him on his genius.
How funny.
Doing this. And he unfired me later. And it ended up in the Mathematica exhibit in a rigid form and was one of the most popular little
How funny.
demonstrations as it toured the country.
That's funny. Why don't you tell us about the Apollo flight and the flight plan that you were involved in?
Okay. I had done a lot of animation for different space missions as that started being done. And I worked over at JPL and at an animation studio to do that. I have in the other room a Mars ball. Instead, it's a globe, but it's Mars.
Uh-huh.
And prominent on the equator of Mars is the Great Canyon Coprides. And the first mission on that was one that I had done, and I had physically carved in like a model railroad, a 4x8 piece of plywood, and made mountains, and then carved down to the contours that I made from the photographic angle that the spaceships did for the first pictures from Mars, and then reconstructed that with dental tools.
Oh, wow.
So a probe camera could go down the little side canyons and come out onto the main canyon and look back at the cliffs.
Wow.
Doing those kind of space movies, I had to anticipate a lot of what was going to be found, because NASA would have me do the short things that were going to be shown to the public at launch time about what they expected to find. And they were going to show the same things when they got there, however long that was, and they were actually showing up on the screen from the real things. And I'd find out whether I had made terrible mistakes. But my record was pretty good.
Yeah.
That led to my being able to do, when Apollo 11 was planned, I had studied a lot of the stuff leading up to it and was familiar with the gravity simulators, and of course my own experience on the gravity wells and my gravity game that I had created for an early computer graphics demo. I did 36 demos for the first HP color machine, and it was interesting how I got into doing that. But we'll stick to the Apollo situation. By then, we had advanced to being able to do more animation, and Walter Cronkite and CBS were going to be broadcasting the Apollo 11 mission live throughout the whole mission.
Mm-hmm.
And I had studied the mission documents. This is the Apollo 11 flight plan. And in fact, I became party to, because of my studying the mission very closely, and CBS decided that I was going to be their HAL 9000 computer for Walter Cronkite. We'd made an automated setup for being able to steer little projectors that would then show on their screen the stored content of all the different data that was happening throughout the mission, and they could show that live by selecting frames from it and moving them around in the screen and so forth. So they were calling that their HAL 9000 computer, and I had a very good relationship with Walter. Walter was about 18 feet from me in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I was live with him during the whole mission. The use of this supplemental stuff became a rich part of the unflowing of the coverage during the whole 3 days. By the time they were separating the two landing modules, the spacecraft itself was on top of the exiting vehicle, the landing model, which was a decelerating rocket, and the guys were in the top, and it had a smaller motor because it was going to have to get all the way back to orbit to meet the other guy who's circling around. And it would have used all the fuel, slowing down the descent. And if it didn't not only slow down, but it had to keep slowing down at exactly the right directions to arrive at the place that they thought was the safest place to land.
Right.
It as the mission was leaving in its coasting orbit and then firing the retros to begin its descent, it would then be opposite where it was going to land, and it would have had to lost enough momentum so that it would be in a tighter orbit, and then that orbit, as it was getting close, would have to change and curve to a perfect thing where it not only ended up in the right place this way and that way, but it had to be at zero that was chosen as the landing place, and it would have to not be going down anymore or be up anymore, or they were never going to get back.
Yeah.
The mission was going quite normally for about half of the descent. And I knew the descent very well, and I'd played on simulators the practice of landing, and got to where I was in that simplified version. I got to where I could reliably come down and land at 000, but only on the simplified one.
Yeah.
All that I had was the earphones of the astronauts themselves and hearing mission control. And I noticed that as they were getting lower, they were not descending as fast as the mission profile said. So I alerted Walter during a commercial that there was something that was changing, and it was changing the orbit. And it looked like they were slowing the orbit some very carefully so that they would be further in the descent, but further east and west, as it were,
right,
on the moon, so they would miss where they were going to land. In other words, they had found that it was too dangerous.
Wow.
As they were getting closer and could see it better. So the director, CBS director, got wind of this. He was listening on the earphones, and he was extremely disturbed because he had the largest audience in the world, and some kid is saying that Cronkite's computer is doing something different than mission control. And he was saying, "You'll never work again."
You heard that a lot, I guess, huh?
Especially for the rest of the mission. The lower it got, the greater the discrepancy. And they were clearly using more and more of their fuel. And they could not blast back to the other from their current situation. They would never meet in an orbit and be able to transfer. They were going to have to land. They were going to have to land very, very softly and not be skidding in any direction when it came down. So the only way that I would know whether this was right, and Walter too, was when they got to what they called low gate. That was 300-foot altitude at the moon. And we were going to cut off our coverage with the altitudes and all the progress that the astronauts were getting, and our computer was saying, was playing in the bottom of the screen. We were going to stop that at 300 feet, so it was just the astronauts. But it wasn't until they were down to 300 feet that I would get any confirmation from them that this was correct.
Right.
And it was at that point, I knew the astronauts would say low gate. The situation was obviously getting more and more crucial because they were using more and more of their fuel, and the slower they went, the more fuel they had to use to, they wouldn't go down faster, but they'd be going sideways.
Yeah.
And this was a very critical maneuver that they were performing with all of the world's, all those people and all they'd been trying for 10 years.
Yeah.
And all the progress and the lives of the guys risking it going down, and everybody trying to do it to such perfection. And the consequence was so grave. And it still was, I couldn't tell which it was going to be. But then the other networks had them landed. And I still had them above low gate. And they were decelerating. And my figures were there on the screen. And Walter was saying, "This is very interesting." Our HAL 9000 computer. And as I came down to 300 feet, they said low gate. So we were tracking what they were actually doing. And then they came down the last part of the descent, getting closer and closer, and their numbers were dropping. And if you play back Cronkite's, that they have that all on tape.
In the archives.
In the archives. And as they're in the last part of the descent, you can hear them updating Mission Control, and you hear Mission Control saying 30 seconds, and then 15 seconds, and then they said, "The Eagle has landed." And that 30 seconds and 15 seconds was the amount of fuel that they projected that they had.
Wow.
So all of that coming together, it was a very emotional experience for everyone, and very much for me to have been a teeny part in what all these people all over the world were trying to make happen.
Right. I mean, I don't think we've had any event like that since, really, you know. That was, I don't know, indescribable.
They did get back safely, and 13 had a little problem, but they got back, and so on.
Yeah.
30 seconds forward. Okay. Contact light, engine arm on.
We're home. Man on the moon.
Houston,
Oh, jeez.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Ooh. Oh, boy.
Thank you.
Boy.
Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
There's that foot going down.
There he is. There's a foot coming down the steps. Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon on this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
No, one small step for man, but I didn't get the second phrase. His quote was, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
There you go.
Welcome home.
And now we have 2 Americans on the moon.
Beautiful view. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation.